everyone. Welcome. This is Dr. PCWoods Fireside Chat interviews. We are going to start doing these from now on to kind of incorporate not only some wealth of knowledge, but if you can't make the chat, then you can come on here, watch the video, and learn a little bit about the topic that we move forward with. So today with us, we have Dr. Greg Hudnall, who is the founder and CEO of the HopeSquad. So thank you, sir, for being with us today. If you wouldn't mind just kind of sharing with us what is the HopeSquad, who you are, what brings you here with me.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Dr. PC. It's interesting. I'm a former high school principal, spent 15 years running a high school and then another 15 years at the district office. And I'm from the state of Utah, home to Provo, Utah, where Brigham Young University is. Community of about 120,000 residents. My school district, about 16,000 students, ninth largest in the state of Utah. And unfortunately, it was also known for its high rate of suicides. We were losing 1 to 2 kids a year for over a dozen years. Our youngest was a 4th grader, took his life on campus, which is hard for people to even comprehend. As a high school principal, I lost 5 kids to suicide. And then one evening, I was contacted by the Provo Police Department to come down and to help identify the body of a young man who had taken his life in the public park next to my school. It was by far one of the most difficult experiences I've ever had. And when I got done, I walked to my car and I literally threw up and sobbed. And I can remember sitting out in front of my high school being so angry that this amazing young man who was very talented, very athletic, decided to see suicide as an option. So I made a vow that I would do everything I could to help prevent suicide. And that's what started our pathway down to HopeSquads. We spent a year researching programs around the country, and we really put all of our focus in training adults, coaches, teachers, hall monitors, parents, grandparents, you name it, even the mayor and the city council. But then we had a young man come into our high school, Provo High School, take his watch off, give it to his best friend, said, "I'm not going to need this after tomorrow." He then went on to tell 4 or 5 other friends that he was going to take his life by suicide, and not one of those friends told an adult. And the very next day he died. He took his life. So we knew we needed to change our approach. And so we developed a model, and we went up to we have 3 high schools in our district. And we went up to our high school that at the time had more threats, more attempts, more suicides than any other school. It's called Timpview, right next to Brigham Young University. It's the school that has won more state championships in every sport than any other school in the state. It's phenomenal. But it's also the school that struggled the most emotionally. And so we walked through every English class and we asked every student, if you were struggling emotionally and needed to talk to someone, list the names of 3 peers that you would feel comfortable going to. And the most amazing thing happened. The same 40 names rose to the top. So we pulled those 40 young people out, started training them on warning signs, risk factors, how to recognize a friend struggling, and most important, when to go to an adult. And the program was so successful, we put it in every school, 13 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 3 high schools. And we went 9 years without a suicide. It was phenomenal. President Obama found out about it. I was invited to go back and work with his team. I was invited to present to the United States Surgeon General. And the cool thing is that high school, Timpview, this is now their 16th year without a suicide. 16 years. And it's because we've empowered the youth, we've trained the adults, and we really trained people to watch out for each other.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, first of all, the 4th grader, not all the kids, but I mean, to think at 4th grade, because I have a son that's in 5th grade and 7th grade, and to think that you're even thinking in the context that my life is not important and that I need to take it, it's unfathomable to me. But I know it's real. I know in my own life, as we shared earlier, in my own life, I know suicide is real. It is depression, PTSD. Those are all very real things that students go through, not just students, but young children, people that, just depending on the traumatic experiences they're having in life, may be pondering about and not know how to have that conversation. So with this being said, I connect specifically in this case with student athletes. So they obviously have a place in my heart as a former student athlete myself, swam and understand the pressures of the sport through. I swam from 5 to I was a junior in college is when I decided to hang up the suit. So I understand the pressures not only from coaches and teammates, but also from the parent. My mom was very competitive at nature, and my brother, he was a swimmer, and he was 5 years older than me. He was a swimmer, and her competitive nature almost pushed him to a point where he didn't want to do it anymore. And I had my coach, I'll never forget, she told my mom when I was 12, she said, look, if you want her to keep swimming, if you desired that for her, you're going to have to back off. Because the pressure was so, just saying to her, hey, mom, I won, or I did this time. She's like, but so-and-so beat you, I love my mom. She passed away 16 years ago. But the reality was that she was very competitive in nature. And it only takes a little bit of time for that to be imparted to the youth. Because now, I often reflect with my own kids, like, I don't want to do that with their sports. I want to encourage them, but I don't want to pressure them that this is it. And I'm very cautious of that, but not, there are many, many, many student athletes that don't have the pleasure of having maybe that coach that speaks to the parent, or just people in their life they can talk to express that concern, or even know that it is a concern. So that brings me to the question of, I'm working with collegiate student athletes, but this could go across the board because, there's been studies by Health and Human Services that show that suicide is like the number 3 or 4 highest for student athletes, understandably, because of the added pressure of their sport. But especially in this time, how can student athletes, or just students in general, connect or recognize the triggers, or the important statements that draw someone to want to commit suicide? Like, what should they be looking for? How do they even ask, oh, are you thinking about taking your life? Is that something they should ask? As
Yeah.
adults, should we ask that?
It's a great question. And one of the things that I've learned through the years is that for the past 100 years, we've told people, if you're struggling, just let me know and I'll get you help. People that are struggling with a mental illness or very serious situation don't want anybody else to know. And what we train our Hope Squad members is to break that barrier. And it's probably one of the most important messages that I could start out with your athletes and all students in general, is that you and I are on the front line of mental health. There isn't a day that doesn't go by that you will run into someone who's struggling. And what we have to have is the courage to be able to reach out to that individual. The second part of it is that we have thought for many years that if we bring it up, it's going to give someone the idea. And the reality is, people don't want to die. They want the pain to go away, but they don't know how to make that pain go away. People take their lives. The top 2 reasons that young people take their lives, and I'm talking up to ages 26, 28, is number 1, they feel all alone, or number 2, they feel a burden. Now, that burden in the world of athletics could be, my time isn't good enough, that I didn't get that tackle and we lost the game. I'm not performing at the level that I usually do. And so all of those variables play into it. And so, first of all, knowing the warning signs is probably one of the most important things. And, the things that reach the top 4 warning signs, number 1 is someone talking about it, making a flippant comment. Well, I'm just going to kill myself. I wish I weren't alive. I can't take the pressure anymore. I oversee a crisis team for the state of Utah. I did it for about 15 years and had about 40 members on our team, and we would get called in after suicide. And we went down to Southern Utah, beautiful young lady, senior in high school, all-star volleyball player. She had received a full ride scholarship to play at the university, and her boyfriend broke up with her. Well, that night she had chatted, reached out to a couple of friends, and said, I'm at the end of my rope. I can't take this. I don't want to deal with it anymore. Came to school the next day, put all of her journals in her boyfriend's locker, went upstairs to the girls' bathroom, and took her life that fast. Young people have a sense of impulsivity. My wife is a therapist for the VA, specializes in PTSD, working with veterans that come back from Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places. She talks about the concept that many of these veterans will spend weeks, months, a year, even years putting together how they're going to take their life, where they're going to do it, etc. Young people, we call it the 24-48 hour period. Romantic breakup, disciplinary action, something that happens to them in their life and it pushes them to the edge, and the impulsivity is right there. And so it's so important when you see these warning signs, someone not acting the norm, responding to a crisis in their life. Now, a crisis in an athletic situation, not winning a game, not performing at the level, not being able to participate, those variables are all playing into it right now. And a lot of times it's the individual's perception. It may not even be a reality, but it's what they're feeling and it's what they're perceiving. I was in the home of a football captain, a huge kid took his life. And the mother shared with me, she said, "Look, Dr. Hudnall, my son was one of the most popular kids in school. He was always on the phone. Every time we went out somewhere, someone was grabbing him and wanting to talk to him, etc." She said the message he left, and I read it. I mean, it broke my heart. But the bottom line was, he said, "I feel all alone, and I feel like people aren't understanding what I'm going through." So you get all of those variables into it. And what I consistently challenge our Hope Squad members, and I challenge everyone, if you have a friend struggling, have the courage to ask, have you thought about hurting yourself? Have you thought about suicide? You look upset. You look like you're really distraught. And this usually isn't like you. Or tonight, when we were out with our friends at the bar, wherever it was, I saw you go ballistic and you don't act that way. So obviously, there's something going on. Can you help me understand? I like to start out with the I message so it's not threatening. I noticed this behavior earlier. Or, you and I are good enough friends. I want you to know how much I care about you. We've been teammates for years. I can tell you're struggling. Can we talk about it? Would you be willing to talk about it? And I'm scared to ask this question, but I feel I need to ask. Have you thought about suicide? So the more that we can put that in the open, because that young person doesn't want to die. They think they do, but what they want is that pain to go away, but they don't know how to make that pain go away. So what happens is they start to get this cognitive restriction, and the normal thinking that you and I have is out the window. It's gone. That depression, that overwhelmness, whatever it is, just overtakes them. I had a young man take a gun, hold it up to his chin, pull the trigger, and the bullet exited his eye. He was in the hospital for 3 months, and then they asked me to work with him. And I got right there in the hospital. I'm sitting next to him, and I asked, "Help me understand what was going on at that time." And he said something like this: "My girlfriend broke up with me on Friday or on Thursday night. I figured if I killed myself on Friday, she would feel so bad over the weekend, we'd get back together on Monday." Now you and I go, "Ooh, wait a minute, there's a piece missing." But what happens is that ability to really understand what's going on, and then all they're thinking about is, how do I make that pain go away? I was at an elementary school, fifth grader took her life. She had been in trouble with her mom. Her mom had put a lot of pressure on her. And she climbed out her back bedroom window, and there was a rope swing, took her life. Now, I honestly believe that young lady didn't cognitively think, well, I'm just going to go kill myself. What she did think was, if I kill myself, I won't be in trouble with mom. Then mom won't be mad at me. And then everything will be okay. With not realizing what that decision would do long term, right? Would take her life. But fifth grader, she's not thinking about that. She's just thinking, oh my gosh, how do I make this pain go away? Same thing with your athletes. When those individuals struggle over a performance, not ability to perform, or they're struggling because of coaches. They're struggling because of parents. They're struggling because of peers. They know they did their best, or maybe they didn't do their best at the time. They gave their all. And sometimes that's so overwhelming that I have nothing left to give. I've done everything I can with inside myself. I'm done. I'm done. I just can't take it anymore. Those are the comments that I hear from athletes.
So let me ask this. If let's say we've got student athletes that are new teammates, right? They don't know each other very long, maybe, especially let's use this quarantine type situation. They haven't even been able to practice maybe a couple times, but they recognize just from maybe their own experience some signs that potentially lead to this conversation. Is it the same approach for someone who's not a close friend to talk and ask that as it is for someone who's known them for a while? Or would it be better for that individual to go to an adult or someone in a higher position? I mean, because I know those are different relationships, especially, a new teammate. I could see a response being, you don't know me. Like, how can you even make that assessment or judgment of me, compared to someone who's been like a friend to that person as a teammate for years? How does someone who may be new to the situation that sees some warning signs have that conversation, or should they just go to someone, an adult or someone in a supervisory role?
Yeah, really good question. And what we tell our Hope Squad members is you always start with a conversation, because invariably, even in situations that you may not know someone, what we have found is that sometimes those kids don't want their friends to know, but they may be willing to share with this individual because now they're not judging them, because I'm not being perfect or whatever. And so we train all 35,000 of our Hope Squad members to cross that line immediately and to say, hey, Jimmy, I noticed today, after practice that you were really struggling. And I could tell that you're hurting. And I'm wondering, is there any, so we always try to start out with, is there anything I can do? And a lot of times it's, no, I'm fine, leave me alone. And then what we train our Hope Squad members to do is then, well, I sometimes when someone gets to the level that you're feeling, sometimes they think about not wanting to wake up anymore. Sometimes they're thinking about not wanting to be around. Have you had those thoughts? And if the individual says, no, I'm fine, just leave me alone, that's when we then train them to go to an adult. Then you go to that assistant coach or whoever and say, coach, it's probably none of my business, but I'm really worried about Johnny. I could tell he's really struggling, and I think it may be worth it for you to follow up with him. So then at least you get that adult following up and meeting with them that way. What we have found is too many times when we don't intervene, it may not be fast enough, because coaches' lives, adults' lives are, yeah, I'll get to it. We have a situation that just breaks our heart of a Hope Squad member went to their counselor and said, hey, I'm worried about Sally. I think she's really struggling. And the advisor said, okay, I'll get with her. Well, that was first period. And the counselor was swamped with kids outside her door because it was end of the term and they were switching classes and other things. And so she had written a note, and, when she got to it, she finally went, oh crap, I got to do this. Well, the young lady had sloughed school and taken her life. So we never know the timing. And we always want to do everything that we can to reach out immediately, and then for that backup to follow up with it.
Wow, that's good information, even for, myself, as I sit here and as I told you earlier, I had just done some mental health training, and this was some of the stuff you touched on earlier was what was touched on in that, about saying that, is that a myth to say, are you thinking about harming yourself? Is that putting that idea in their head? And I can only imagine what your Hope Squad members, even in schools and colleges, are thinking when they say that, or thinking before they go through the training, like, oh, I could never say that to them. But to know that that's a better thing to say, to make that conversation not necessarily normal, but frequent so that they know that it's not something like hush hush, because I do feel that suicide is probably one of those conversations people don't want to talk about a lot. Just coming from my own perspective and sharing my story, it's not something I definitely shared with anyone, but I think that if someone had seen, I do think my teammates, they saw me struggling with my mother's death. I was deeply depressed. She was my best friend. I couldn't even swim. Like that was just so overwhelming. Imagine if they had considered that, okay, maybe she's a little off. This is not her norm, what that could have done for me. But I'm still here, unlike so many that we've lost. So let's kind of transition this now to, okay, you've had that conversation with your friend or the teammate. You're still a little concerned. What is the job? Where should they go next? Should it be the coach? Should it be a counselor at school? What does that look like for the next level after you've made that initial conversation?
Yeah, and what I have found is it's different. It's so unique. And going back to what you talked about earlier, suicide is one of our biggest silent tragedies because we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to put it out there. Um, and one of the things that I have found over time is that what I train young people is the situation better than anybody. If your teammate has a really good relationship with coaches, and let me just go on the record here because I love coaches and I have many coaches in my family and I've coached my son's baseball teams. But I also know, being an educator, a principal, and seeing what coaches are trained to do, coaches are trained to push kids to the edge because that's their job, to get the most. And sometimes that even the athlete look back at it and go, I could have never done that without my coach because they were the ones that saw the ability for me to push. Well, in suicide prevention training, coaches are sometimes the most difficult to work with because coaches don't know where to draw that line. And it's not that they're bad people, it's that they're taught to push beyond that line. They're the ones that are taught, we're going to go to the edge and we're going to do whatever it takes to make you a winner. And so in that situation, if the young person who's worried about their friend is worried about their coach, then I'm going to a counselor or to another adult. Now, if this is a coach that they've had amazing positive experiences with, and they see that that coach is a caring coach and can work through and see the difference, then I would go to the coach first too. So my point is, it's a different level. I've seen some of the most amazing football coaches who couldn't let it go. And then I saw some of the most amazing football coaches who said, wow, Greg, thanks for teaching me this, because now I have to watch how I coach to make sure that I'm not breaking that line or putting that young person up against the wall. And it's a hard dilemma for coaches because we pay them to get the most out of you young people. And so I always tell young people, evaluate the situation. We've had situations where kids have come in and said, the counselor's a jerk. They don't want to, and so then I say, then don't go to the counselor. Do you have a teacher on campus, another adult? Oh, yeah, Mrs. So-and-so, our English teacher. She's phenomenal. Everybody loves her. Okay, then I would go to her immediately. So because your environment, and for me to just come out and say, yeah, go to the coach every time, hasn't worked. And we unfortunately have had some situations where, the coaches didn't have that ability. And it wasn't that they weren't a good coach. They just didn't have that mental health background.
So let me ask this, what if, because if it is being a silent tragedy, many times we don't even see the warning signs, or there aren't potentially a warning sign, as some of the stories you've just mentioned. I mean, something happened, then abruptly is there any chance of saving that individual when you don't see necessarily a warning sign or an abrupt change that would cause the teammate or something to say, hey, what's wrong, or hey, I'm concerned? If it was so sudden and they're so great at hiding it, how do you know? Or are just those ones that slip through the cracks?
We're always going to have, my wife talks about the concept of the one percenters that no matter what we do, they're intent on taking their life for whatever reason. But I do think I was doing a training just the other day, a Zoom training, and the mother chatted to me privately on the side, she said, Dr. Hudnall, I want to thank you because I lost a daughter. And there were 200 people on this Zoom, 200 parents. And I sent back to her and I said, oh, I'm so sorry. She said, at first my husband and I did not see any signs, but after we went through one of your trainings, there were 2 or 3 signs that we wish we would have known, that we wish we would have seen. Um, and so you're always going to have those variables. But one of the things that we have found more important is having that friendship. So I can see you're struggling and I'm here for you. And if you ever want to talk, would you at least reach out to me? Because I'm afraid you're going to hurt yourself. And the more that we can be honest and sincere, to that friend, look, I'm not a mental health freak. And I know a lot of people are worried. I'm worried about you. And it's obvious that you're struggling. I just want you to know I'm here for you. I do a lot with our statewide television, and they did a series of suicide prevention. And at the end of the reporter was interviewing me, and it was played on the late night news at 10 p.m. But he said, Dr. Hudnall, what do you hope to get out of this? And I said, more than anything, I just want I'm giving parents permission to talk about it, to talk to their child if they're concerned. And then that was it. And the next morning, I got a phone call from this gentleman who said, can I come and visit with you? And I said, yeah, sure. So he came over to my office, and he's a huge guy. He filled my door, Hawaiian. And he said, I got to share this story. He said, my wife and I were laying in bed watching the news on television. He said, our son is an all-state football player, 9 universities across the country. I mean, this is a big kid. And he said, we were in the state playoffs, and he broke his ankle, broke his leg. And all 9 of those scholarship offer, full ride, were rejected within a day. Rejected. The game was on a Friday. On Saturday, they're notifying the parents. Sorry, Mrs. So-and-so, we need to let you know because your son broke his leg, we're removing that college. So he said, my son's been in his bedroom for a week, hardly ever comes out. And he said, we've been so worried. So when you got done with your presentation, my wife turned to me and said, you got to go downstairs and see. And he goes, why me? You go down there. And she goes, no, you go down there. So he said, I went right downstairs, knocked on our son's bedroom door, and he said, come in. And he said, I came in, sit down on the end of the bed, and finally, and he goes, I'm heeing and hawing. And finally, my son goes, Dad, what do you want? You don't come down here unless you want something. And then he started to tear up, and he said, Mom and I watched this thing on KSL News, and the guy said, he described you perfectly, and your mom and I are worried about you. And I don't know how to ask this, but I'm gonna ask. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Here's this big 6'6", 320-pound, huge guy sits up on the end of his bed and just starts to sob. And his dad, well, I get teary-eyed, and his dad is sobbing, telling me the story. And he said, all I could do was hold him and hug him. And I said, at that moment, that's probably all he needed. And they were finally able to get him into counseling and to get him help. The goal is intervening at that crisis moment. Let the professionals take care of it. But more lives are saved by family members and friends who are willing to watch and be that frontline mental health person.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that story definitely tears me up too. And I think about myself as a parent, just making sure my husband and I are always very intentional about, boys, you can always talk to us about anything, but I also understand as they approach and get a little bit older, there may be things that they don't feel like they can have that conversation with us about. So we try to make it an open communication at home just we've been doing this since they were little, just so that would be ingrained in them to say, like, I can talk to them. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not in trouble. I can talk. But to think about, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about my own story and how I had, after my mom's death, I had not only teammates, but I had friends at West Point that came up to me and said, hey, if you want to talk. And I felt this burden to talk to them, because I'm like, why would I burden them by, sharing all this stuff with them? And I would play it off as I'm fine, and go through the point of attempt that on my own life, and it doesn't work. Get through it through my faith, with some friends who were there, faith-based around me. And then I get to TCU. I get to Texas Christian University to swim. They don't really know when I sold myself to them as far as, hey, this is who I am, this is what I can do for you, mom hadn't died yet, and now I get there, they've given me scholarship. Nothing's the same. Swimming is never the same for me again. I get there and I'm not this person at all, but this happened throughout that first year. My husband can tell you that's when we met and were dating. There would be days that I could care less. I didn't care about if I did well in practice or school. You're talking to me. I'm not the one that's going to be disrespectful, but that would be those moments. And these coaches, they pulled me in their office, and I've thanked them today. I've thanked them just recently because I bring them up so much. They pulled me in their office and they said, Paige, we understand that, your mother passed and you're going through a tough time, but you need to see a counselor, and you're not allowed back on this to practice until you see a counselor. Wow. And forced me to see a counselor on campus, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. Yeah. Because I didn't feel like I was burdening a counselor to talk, because that's their job to listen to me. So I was able to, it took me about 3 sessions of just crying my eyes out and saying all those things, and them really just sitting there listening before I had, and then some antidepressant medicine, just for about 6 weeks that balanced my hormones back out. And, and then I was able to start that journey of grief, true grief, of like moving through it properly. But if it wasn't for those coaches to really, and it's unique that you say that, because I did not have this close relationship with these coaches at that point. I was new to the team, but I'm so thankful that they made me do it, and I'm just thankful that they were bold enough to say, hey, you're going to a counselor or you can't come back to practice. Yeah. Pretty much just, it's this or that, and they knew that swimming, obviously that was what brought me there. That was important for me, that I needed to see the counselor. So just thinking of the stories you shared with me and thinking like, man, I did play through that role of, no, I'm good, I don't need to talk to anybody. But it took somebody with authority to force me in that situation that truly helped save my life. Because even my husband, who, at the time we were just dating, he didn't know like what he was dealing with, as far as someone who, he'd never lost a parent. This was my second parent lost, and I'm on my own, and swimming's never the same. And it just, everything was changed. And so I'm appreciative of the conversation you just had with me to reflect on my own situation. And I hope that these students, when they watch this, when we talk about this in our fireside chats, can think of a situation potentially in their own life or their family or friends that they know that they need to go and have that conversation with. That hard question: are you thinking about hurting yourself, of killing yourself? Are you thinking of those things? Because it can save so many lives, and I understand it now. But my last question for you before we get off would be, if somebody wants to learn or be trained in the Hope Squad and become a Hope Squad member, as a college student, what can they do that? What do they need to do? How do they get connected?
Yeah, one of the most important things is to talk to their school counselor about getting the program on their site. You can go to our website, hopesquad.com, of course, and read about it. I was reminded when you were talking, People Magazine came out and spent a few days with us doing some stories. And it was interesting. The reporter, his name's Johnny Dodd, and he said, Greg, I just want to do the story on you. You're the founder. I want it. And I said, it's not me, it's the students. And after spending a half a day, I said, let's go visit some schools. And he said, I really don't want to. And I said, please, let's just go visit a couple. So we went and visited a junior high, middle school. By the time we were done listening to their stories, he's going, wow, this is impressive. So I took him to a couple of other schools, and we ended up at Mountain View High School, which is a very successful academic athletic high school in the state of Utah. And one of the Hope Squad members, it's in the article in People Magazine, but one of the members talked, and he and his buddy were on the football team, and he was captain of the football team and student body president. And his best friend, after one of their games, he could tell his best friend was hurting. So he went to him and said, man, you got to talk to someone. I've learned this from the Hope Squad. It really helps. And the friend said, I ain't talking to anybody. So he knew he had to get help. So he went and got the school counselor got the coach. They were finally able to get him help. And he had put a plan together to kill himself that night, had
Wow.
a gun, everything. So they hospitalized him. And so the reporter's talking to this young man, and he said, "So what's it like now?" And he said, "My best friend won't talk to me anymore. And it's been 3 months." And the reporter said, "So then was it really worth it?" And I was so proud of this football Hope Squad member, because he stood up and he said, "Look," he said, "right now I wouldn't have a friend and he wouldn't be alive, because I know how aggressive he is, and he's the type of guy that when he goes out full fledged with anything and everything, and I'm pretty confident he would have killed himself." So I had to make a choice, and he said, "You may not be my best friend right now, but I pray the day will come when he'll understand that what I did was the best thing ever." And I mean, talk about a powerful message. And
Yeah.
those are the things that we've got to remember, because it is embarrassing when you're hurting. You don't want anybody to know. And sometimes when people reach out, it's like, "No, I'm fine, just leave me alone." But just like you mentioned in your situation, you weren't all right, and it took enough people to come on board to support you, and it took enough courage, because they could tell by your performance that you weren't performing at the level that you're capable of. And those are some of the earmarks that are easy to see in our colleague athletes that aren't performing at that level, that there may be something going on. I remember the story of a young person that had strained a muscle, tore a muscle, didn't want anybody to know, because then she couldn't run in the state playoff. She was on a track team, and she couldn't run in the state medley. And so she did everything she could to make it, and she was good enough that she could compete, and they would never even get close without her. So here they are in the state track meet, and she's competing. Well, then it seizes up on her, and then she just falls over. And of course, she's blaming herself, put everything through it, put a plan together to kill herself. And once again, if it hadn't been teammates that recognized what was going on and got the coaches involved, she probably would have taken her life.
Yeah. Oh man, this has been great. I honestly, from talking with my husband and he spoke with you already, I had an idea, but I had no true idea of the depth of this conversation and this interview. And I really want to say thank you for taking the time out to share this information with me, but more importantly with the students and the student athletes and potentially even the coaches that watch this interview, because I truly believe it will help someone. And my philosophy with these fireside chats is that if it can help one person,
Right.
that's all that matters. That's
Yeah.
all that I need. Whatever the topic is, if one person got something from it, then it's all worth it. So I just want to say thank you again for joining me in this interview. If you wouldn't mind holding on after I go ahead and pause this, I'm just so appreciative, and I know that we will be in contact in the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the opportunity.